In the previous video, we went through and manually set up our dependency injection. So on the screen here, you can see the JUnit test that I have. And basically, we are managing the dependency injection. Our classes are set up for dependency injection, but through the JUnit test, we are managing it. So what we want to do is refactor our test and our project, our little project here, to go ahead and start using dependency injection. So if we wanted to do the original controller that we started working with, you can see here that is initializing the greeting service internally. So we would have to make significant changes to that class, which is something that we really don't want to be doing. So here, I'm not going to modify the original controller, but the others, the constructor, property, and setter injected controllers, I am. So the first thing that we want to do is come in and annotate this with a service annotation. So this is one of the Spring stereotypes that says, hey, this is a Spring component. So this is one way that we can create a Spring component is by annotating it with a Spring stereotype. In this case, we are using service, indicating that this is supposed to be a service conceptually. Now, here, what we can do is also we'll annotate this as a controller. So this now says that this is a Spring managed component. And in this case, with the constructor injected controller, because it has a constructor of the greeting service and only that constructor, Spring will know that we need to go ahead and auto wire that automatically. However, in this case, if I come in and do the same thing for this controller, now Spring doesn't know what to do. So it could do some inspection here. So we need to drop it a hint here, and we want to use the auto-wired annotation to say that we want this to be injected. And you can see there IntelliJ is giving us an alert saying field injection is not recommended. I think I've covered that in the course. It is not recommended. It is a way that you can utilize it. I do not recommend it though. So, but I am going to cover that in the course just so you can see the contrast between the different ways of wiring things up. And then finally here, this is also one of our controllers. By annotating it with a controller, this now becomes a Spring managed component. And in this case, because we do have the setter, we can annotate either the property or the setter. So let's go ahead and do the property. Sometimes that gets a little more clear if you have a larger service. So we'll go ahead and annotate that. And we're getting a warning on this. So here you can see it's asking us to create a constructor. We're not going to do that. It's a suggestion. So even IntelliJ knows the proper way to go through and do things. So now I've updated my different controllers, and let's come in and take a look at the tests themselves. So let's come in. I'm going to work from the property up. So this is a property injected controller. And what I can do here is I should be able to comment out before each and just say auto wired, and also annotate this as a Spring Boot test. So now I'm going to tell JUnit that I want the Spring context to be loaded. And when the Spring context runs, it'll look at the default application context as it's configured for our application. Here we're not overriding anything. And because the main class is here, Spring is going to do what's called a component scan. It'll look in its in that package and any package below it. I see a lot of people make mistakes where they put something in one of these other packages. So make sure that you're putting it there. You can tell Spring to look elsewhere outside of that directory structure, but by default, Spring is going to be looking in that core package, that the same package that the main class is in, or anything below that. So let's go ahead and run this, verify that the property injection is working. And we can see that say hello, and you can see here that we did get that injected properly. Now let's come back to our test, and let's go ahead and take care of the setter. And again, the setter here, we probably just delete all of that. I'll go back to that other test and delete the same stuff. We'll say auto wired, and again, we need to annotate this as a Spring Boot test. Now we can go ahead and run this. You can see that does the output as expected. And then finally, we can verify our constructor. Again, I'm going to get rid of that before each. Auto wired, come up here at spring boot test, and we'll go ahead and run that. So now you can see that we've refactored everything. So just to recap what we changed, came in here, we annotated the service implementation as a service. That indicates to Spring that this is going to be a Spring managed component. And then also in our 3 controllers, we annotated them as controller, which also indicates that it's a Spring managed component. And in this case, in the life cycle of the bean, Spring needs to create an instance of this to put it into the context, sees that this has a constructor, so it will execute and inject a greeting service into the constructor. So that tells Spring that it needs to create the greeting service first and then inject it into this. And then on the setter and property, we do need to put auto-wired on the property or the setter. So the auto-wired could be put on either, and also on the property. Obviously, you only have the property, which is not recommended. But now we've turned over all the dependency injection to the Spring framework, allowing Spring to create and manage the components as needed based on the needs of our application. In this video, I have a small correction to make to the lesson. A guy named Mike on Slack pointed out I made a mistake here, and he's absolutely right. In this, we have the setter injected controller, and I'd made a mistake on this because I honestly don't use setter injection that often or property injection. You can see that IntelliJ is giving me a warning here, and the behavior I expected is that the property, the auto-wire could be on either the property or the setter, and if the setter was there, that Spring would use it. It turns out that I am incorrect, and we can prove this real quick. So if I come in here and just do a system out, and I'll take the recommendation there. So we're just going to say that this method was in fact called. Now if I run the test, we'll see that we don't get that system out. So come down here, we do get the output from the controller, but we do not get, or from the service I mean, but we do not get the system out and the controller from the setter. And if we move this auto wire down to the method itself, like so, and we rerun this, we will see that we do get the system output showing that the controller or the setter, in fact, was called. So very minor but important distinction here. Placing that annotation on the property will force the property to be utilized. So reflection, that happens using reflection, which is slow. So that's definitely not a behavior that I want. And again, we're doing the auto wire on the setter that utilizes it. I was mistaken and previously in the course where I thought that you could put it in either place and that if the setter existed, that Spring would utilize that. Obviously, that is not the case. So we do need to place the auto wire on the setter method and not on the property if we want the setter to be utilized.